All right, we're going to assume the audio is all good to go and our visual. Please don't hesitate to ping to reach out if there are any issues as we go. We have an intimate group this evening, so please don't hesitate to pop in with any questions that come up as we go. But again, we're thrilled to have you. Welcome to the introduction to GREMax. I'm Jonathan Herzog. I'm the head of GRE content here at GREMax. Just briefly, by way of background, I completed my law degree at Harvard, went to business school at NYU Stern, completed my undergrad at Harvard in psychology, have over 5 years of experience coaching and tutoring students to get top scores on the GRE, which is a test I love, and helping students achieve their dreams getting into the grad schools that they've aspired to go to. This is a photo of me pre-pandemic. As you can see, some things have changed. And we're thrilled to welcome you to a very exciting launch of our GREMax GRE tutoring. And I'm accompanied by my colleague, Daniella Wenger. Daniella, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, so I'm Daniella, and I am a tutor with GREMax, and I'm really excited to get to know all of you and talk a little bit more about the GRE today. I personally struggled a lot with the GRE and spent a lot of time studying for the LSAT, so I'm really excited to talk about the GRE as a great opportunity for test taking.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you, Daniella. And again, as we go, don't hesitate to pop any questions, thoughts, reflections in the Q&A about the webinar or in the chat about GREMax generally. All right. So what is the world-class GRE tutoring that we offer all about? We exclusively screen and hire for folks who, as Daniella said, are not naturals. What that means is in our own struggles, we've had to reverse engineer the test, broken it down to first principles, and are guaranteed to help you unlock your full potential on it. The GREMax difference lies in delivering 10x the quality of any other offering at the same or lower price. So just to say a little bit more about this, we're experts not only in the ins and outs of the GRE, but also the psychology of the test maker and test taker, and apply a cognitive and behavioral science approach to inform our teaching and unlock the biggest impact and value for you. So let's get started. First, what the heck is the GRE? The GRE, for those of you who are newer to it, is the most widely accepted grad school admissions test in the country and in the world. The GRE, the Graduate Records Exam, is administered by ETS, which is a non-for-profit that created the exam in 1949, the GMAT in 1954, and develops and administers the SAT and APs for College Board. So other tests you might have encountered or even taken yourself. Who takes the GRE? More than 500,000 students across the world take the GRE. It's one of the most diverse student group that takes a grad school entrance exam. For almost all master's and PhD or doctoral level degrees, including professional degrees, such as the MBA and the JD or the law degree. When can you take the GRE? You can take the GRE now 24/7, 365 at home with a digital remote proctor system known as ProctorU. So you can take it at your convenience on your laptop, wherever you have connection to Wi-Fi. What is the GRE test? The GRE tests 3 main subject areas. First, analytical writing. Second, verbal reasoning. And third, quantitative reasoning. So what is verbal reasoning? Verbal reasoning covers vocabulary, formal logic, and reading comprehension. We'll dive into each of these in the slides to come, but this really informs our approach to coaching and tutoring for the GRE. What is quantitative reasoning? First and foremost, quantitative reasoning is not a math test. I'll repeat that. It is not a math test. What is it then? It is also a reasoning test that uses the language, logic, and syntax of high school level math. But again, the GRE is a reasoning test for verbal and quantitative reasoning. A couple of common refrains we've heard working with students over the years include, I'm just overthinking. I'm just running out of time on this particular, say, quant section. I'm just not a math person, or I'm just not a geometry or data analysis person. What this really means, and what we'll work together to train through, is you haven't yet mastered the quantitative reasoning skills sufficient for your target score. Substantively, the areas that quantitative reasoning covers include arithmetic, algebra, geometry, and data analysis. So again, the tools of high school mathematics, but it is a reasoning test first and foremost. And we'll dive into some sample questions later on so you can get a flavor for what those would look like and how we might approach them together. One of the unique attributes of the GRE is it's one test that can help you unlock thousands or tens of thousands of opportunities. As just one example, you could take the GRE and apply to programs at more than 10 Harvard graduate schools. Now, again, the GRE and our work together is tailored and customized to your specific program and dreams. But you can take one test and have the optionality and flexibility to apply widely to many types of opportunities. How is the GRE scored? There are 3 scaled scores you'll get from the GRE. First, you'll get your analytical writing assessment score from 2 essays on a scale of 0 to 6. And then, most importantly, in applying to grad school, you'll get a verbal reasoning score and a quantitative reasoning score. Each of those scaled from a 130 to a 170. You can see here that a 170 on verbal reasoning translates to a 99th percentile, and a 170 on quantitative reasoning translates to a 96th percentile. So these are the 2 big numbers you'll get on test day, the V and the Q, the verbal and the quant, each out of a scaled score of 170. This is an overarching look at what test day will look like. Again, you'll have 2 essay portions where you'll analyze an issue and you'll analyze an argument. And then you'll have 2 scored verbal sections and 2 scored quant sections. You may also face an experimental or research section. And there are breaks allotted in between, offered on a computer. This chart here goes into more detail of the structure and scoring of the GRE. So as you can see, in the 2 verbal sections, that creates your composite score out of 170. You got 20 questions each. That gives you your verbal section score. And you've got 20 questions each on each of the 2 quant sections, and those together give you your quant section score out of that 170. Those are the 2 big numbers in the grad school admissions process. So what is a good score? The truth is, it really depends. It really depends on what you want to do, where you want to go, and what type of program you intend to apply to. This chart here shows the mean score on verbal and quant. As you can see, they're around a 150 or 153. So generally speaking, a good score is seen as something above the 160 range for quant and verbal. But this really depends and varies. For instance, say you're applying to a computer science or engineering master's or PhD. On that school site, they're going to publish a higher quant distribution score and preference that in their admissions. If your dream is applying to a humanities program or a literature program, say. On that school's website, they're also going to demonstrate that they preference the verbal score in the admissions process. So it really depends on what your target schools and types of programs are. And again, as we go, don't hesitate to pop into the chat or Q&A for any clarifying questions or the like. One of the awesome things about the GRE, and frankly, one of the reasons I love the tests is you get your score immediately. So you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait anxiously. Like I did, I remember I took the LSAT a number of years ago, and you had to wait 5 weeks back then, and you would just get an email with a score and never be able to see the questions or learn or get feedback on them. In the GRE, you get your score immediately, and you actually eventually see a breakdown of the questions and the difficulty that you faced on test day. Another great aspect of the GRE is what's called score choice. So this means you can choose which scores to accept or send to schools. Again, something that can really potentially be helpful depending on your grad school aspirations. So you're not locked into a particular score. All right. With that as our introduction, we're going to dive a little bit deeper to begin with verbal reasoning. So as we talked about up front, you're going to face 2 scored sections for verbal reasoning with 20 questions each. Now, the breakdown of those questions can roughly be summarized as about half vocabulary and about half logical reasoning and reading comprehension. So this is the general structure, general breakdown of what you'll see on verbal reasoning on test day. So a number of the tools in your toolbox that you'll develop and train and work with us on in logical reasoning include identifying what passages, either a single passage or a series of passages, whether they constitute a set of facts or an argument. And if the passage is an argument, identifying the premises or the data points or piece of evidence used to argue a particular conclusion, a point that the author is trying to maintain in their argument. Now, in all of this bottom-up skills-building foundational training we'll do together in the logical reasoning portion of verbal reasoning, we'll also introduce some formal logic. And this will really unleash tremendous value and help you attack the answer choices. So we're going to pull out our handy dandy pen and iPad here. And let's take a look at a simple conditional. So what this statement says is, if A, then B. And tell me if you can't see what I am writing. If A, then B. Another way we'll call A is the sufficient condition. A is enough to guarantee to bring about the event or the occurrence of B, which we'll call the necessary condition. Now, let's boil this down to a particular example. Let's say, I'll say, if I have a gala apple, then I know it is red. Alternatively, all gala apples are red. Let's posit that for a second. Already, with our logic intuition, we'll see that there are a number of invalid inferences and some valid inferences. So what might be some invalid inferences based on the conditional that if I have a gala apple, then it must be red? Well, first, I can try to just reverse the statement. So if B, then A. If I present to you something that is red, it must be a gala apple. That is certainly invalid. Why? Because you can at least think of some things that are red, say a Corvette or the pen or this book in front of me, that are not gala apples. What's another invalid inference from the if gala apple, then red? We can just incorrectly negate each side of this conditional. So we can say, if not A, then not B. Now again, don't worry at all if you haven't seen this formal logic notation before. This can get pretty nuanced and complex, and today we're just diving into whetting your appetite for the type of tools in your toolbox and the type of skills that we'll work on together that are unique to GREMax and our approach to logical reasoning. But taking a step back, if not A, then not B. So if I don't present you a gala apple, then it must not be red. Well, hold on. We already said there are things that are red that are not gala apples. So the fact that I didn't give you a gala apple does not guarantee, it's not sufficient to guarantee the condition that what I gave you is not red. What is, however, a valid inference? One logically equivalent statement to if A, then B is to flip and negate. So this would be if not B, then not A. If what I give or present to you is not red, I can guarantee to you it is not a gala apple, because we said up front that all gala apples must be red. Now, if this is getting a little bit dizzying, don't worry. That's a great sign. Because what we'll do, and part of what GREMax will do, is work hand in hand with you in the bottom-up skills foundational training. And this is just, again, an example of how we can unlock tremendous value in approaching questions using tools and frameworks like this. So I'm going to clear this screen. And we're going to dive in to our first sample question. Very exciting. All right. GRE verbal sample question 1. Now again, recall back to the structure of questions we're facing. About half of the questions on verbal will be logical reasoning or reading comprehension. You'll get a single passage or a set of paragraphs and answer one or a series of questions about that passage or paragraphs. And as we go, let's apply some of the preliminary tools in our toolbox, like set of facts or argument, like premises versus conclusions, and like the formal logic. All right. Centuries ago, the Maya of Central America produced elaborate, deeply cut carvings in stone. Okay. Statement of fact, giving us some interesting context about the Maya of Central America. Sentence 2. The carvings would have required a cutting tool of hard stone or metal. All right, let's pause for a second. I'm going to highlight here required. What required in this instance signals to me is some sort of necessary condition, right? Something is being triggered here that sounds a little bit like that formal logic stuff we talked about before. All right, so if we set up our premises, these are the parts of the argument that are then used to support a conclusion. We're going to lay those out in just a moment. Let's take a look at sentence 3. Iron ore deposits exist throughout Central America, but, all right, we're signaling some sort of contrast, but apparently the Maya never developed the technology to use them. And the metals the Maya have been known to use, copper and gold, would not have been hard enough. All right, sentence 3 is a mouthful. A lot going on here. Let's just finish our preliminary reading. Therefore, all right, that's a key signal. Therefore is often going to introduce a conclusion for an argument. The Maya must have used stone tools to make these carvings. All right. So we're applying fairly advanced tools here, but I just want to show you them in action. Therefore, the Maya must have used stone tools to make these carvings. This is clearly the conclusion of our argument. And we're going to simplify in our little formal logic summary here. So our conclusion looks something like this. ST, for stone tools. All right, we have an argument. It's not just a set of facts. We have our conclusion. Came a little bit easier because they used the therefore. Now, what were the premises again? Well, first we said we had these stone carvings. Let me erase that line. Not land where it should have. So we have these stone carvings, all right? Stone carvings exist. And these carvings would have required a cutting tool of hard stone or metal, right? So recall back, if gala apple, then it must be red. If stone carving, then it must be a hard stone tool or a metal tool. So let's put that in our formal logic structure. If a stone carving, then a stone tool or a metal tool. Again, just a brief summary of what we saw. Now, oftentimes in our GRE questions, and we delve into this into great depth in our logical flaws analysis, there's going to be some missing premise, some gap in the logic, some assumption the author is making that is our job to call attention to. So what is the assumption here? How are we able to conclude that the Maya must have used stone tools on the basis of the premise that they had these stone carvings, and the stone carvings had to have been done by stone tools or metal tools? Well, and again, it gets a little bit nuanced and complex, but what they're trying to get us to assume is the Mayans did not use metal tools. And again, remember sentence 3 here, that kind of messy, wordy one. That is where our assumption is buried. How do they want us to assume they didn't use metal tools? Because they tell us that the iron ore deposits exist, but the Maya never developed the technology to use them. All right, well, hold on. The fact that they didn't develop the tech to use the iron ore deposits, does that necessarily mean they didn't use metal tools? Now, you don't have to be a geologist. You don't have to have any subject matter expertise on the GRE. It is a reasoning test, purely a reasoning test. But they're applying these foundational principles and frameworks to new scenarios, to new contexts. So our notion of what metal is, metal includes many things, it turns out. It could include things like iron, or copper, or gold, or aluminum. You name it. You pick your favorite metal. Again, you don't have to know anything about metals, but they want you to assume if they didn't have the tech to use the iron ore deposits, they didn't use metal tools. And they want you to assume the metals they are known to have used, copper and gold, would not have been hard enough, that would be enough, sufficient to guarantee they didn't use metal tools. All right, I saw there might have been a question. Was there any clarifying question or confusion just about that setup up front? Or are we all good? All right, I assume we're great, so let's keep rolling. So this was our setup. And this is super key, because again, if we recall back to that structure of what GRE will look like on test day, we have, on average, about 1.5 minutes for these verbal reasoning passages. And notice how we're going to spend about 1 minute of that up front, not even looking at the question stem, and not even looking at the answer choices. Now, this will become gradually automatic as we train and work together, so you won't have to write down the formal logic structure. You'll just actually process and translate the words into that structure in your mind. With all this set up, let's clear this page and finally take a look at what even the question is. Now, when I'm tackling a short passage like this, a logical reasoning passage, I often quickly glance at what we call the question stem right here. It says, which of the following, if true, most seriously weakens the argument? All right, so we'll be drilling this into you ad infinitum. But this signals to us that this is a weakened question. And this is going to inform our approach to attacking and beelining to the correct answer choice. There's only one correct answer choice and 4 incorrect answer choices. So we want to weaken, but we're really well positioned to do that because we've already broken down the argument into its premises, the missing assumption, and the conclusion. Recall that assumption, that missing premise, is that the fact that they didn't have the tech to use the iron ore deposits and the fact that the copper and gold they were known to have used weren't hard, we're supposed to assume from that they didn't use metal tools at all. So that's what we're looking for. If we're looking for something to weaken the argument, we want something to show that, well, maybe they could have used metal tools. So it's not ironclad. It's not guaranteed that they used stone tools as the author concluded. Now, again, I've literally blocked the answer choices in my mind. I haven't looked at any of them yet. And I'm coming up on time here, right? This is a pretty lengthy setup, but I know exactly what I'm looking for. So there's no distractions and no trap answer of any sort will lead me astray. All right, answer choice A. In various parts of the world, civilizations that could not make iron from ore fashioned tools out of fragments of iron from meteorites. Holy crap, it's like we literally predicted the answer. Because what does answer choice A do? It weakens the argument. It says, well, in other times, other parts of the world, they could make iron from ore, made from tools out of fragments of iron from meteorites. So if you think about it, I don't have the tech to develop the laptop that I'm using, but I use the laptop. So the fact that I don't have the tech doesn't mean I'm not using that tool. All right, answer choice A seems awesome. Let's take a look at B. All the metallic mine artifacts that have been found by archaeologists are made of metals that are too soft for carving stone. Wait a second, hold on. Many of the answer choices that are incorrect will be systematically and predictably incorrect. And if we're not clear on the question we're answering, that we're answering a weakened question, we can fall for these trap answers. What does this answer do? It might actually strengthen the argument. It says that the metals the archaeologists found were too soft for carving stone. So this might be a valid inference, a restatement, or strengthen the argument. Definitely doesn't weaken. Choice C. The stone out of which these carvings were made is harder than the stone used by other Central American peoples. All right, well, there's lots of different peoples, lots of different stones and metals, and we can get lost in this. So the focus here and the clarity of mind is key. And we have an extensive part of our training that works on logical flaws, looking at relative versus absolute comparisons. But let's draw a little chart here as an example. Let's say this were true, that the stone was in fact harder than the stone used by other Central American peoples. All right, let's say that's the stone, that's the hardness of the stone used by other Central American peoples. Let's say this is the hardness of the stone that the Mayan people use. Well, does that tell you anything at all about how hard they must have been? What if the threshold for how hard they were was far and above that? That relative comparison does not tell you anything necessarily about the absolute value. So C is out. Choice D. The technique that the Maya used to smelt gold and some other metals could not have been easily applied to the task of extracting iron from iron ore. All right, at this point, we're pretty familiar. It could be somewhat an inference or restatement of a premise, and in fact, possibly strengthen the argument. Definitely doesn't weaken it. And finally, archaeologists disagree about how certain stone tools that have been found among Mayan ruins were used. Great. I disagree. Daniella disagrees. So what? What bearing does this have on the claim, the conclusion, that the Mayans must have used stone tools? Again, of the many types of trap answers we'll encounter out of scope. So what? All right. I saw another question came in. So before I clear the screen, just want to see if, all right, just a technical question. Fantastic. Now we are going to transition on to Daniella to take a stab at our vocabulary type verbal reasoning question. One thing I want to just call your attention to again is, and Daniella and I can attest to this in our personal experience in getting up to speed and reverse engineering the GRE ourselves, is that all the other folks who are teaching or GRE verbal would in fact tell you to approach passages like the one we just did by saying, hey, read it, or read critically, and read closely. And the tools would often be, hey, go read lots of things. And we'll talk about this in just a moment. But what's so different about our approach is, again, using these tools and frameworks to punch way above our weight and unlock that value. So off to Daniella for this vocab question.
Hi, everyone. Today we're going to approach a classic vocabulary question. And the first thing I would like everyone to do is to cover up the answer choices. And the reason for that is because when answering any question on the GRE, we want to get into the mind of the test maker, because the test maker leaves and drops many hints for us to pick up on. And at GREMax, we are going to show you exactly how to find the hints that the test maker leaves for us to find. So the first thing that we're going to do is read the question. So I'll just read it for everyone. The playwright's approach is blank, in that her works blank the theatrical devices normally used to create the drama on the stage. So there are a few things that I'm looking at here. First, what is the relationship between the first blank and the second blank? The first blank says the playwright's approach is blank. So something about the approach to describe it. It's all about describing the approach, and that her works blank the theatrical devices normally used to create the drama on the stage. I'm just looking away at my iPad over here. And that her works blank the theatrical devices normal. So the relationship is that the second blank and the first blank are related. They're talking about the same thing. But what is the clue here? The clue here is the word normally. Because the reason why the clue is normally is because the playwright's approach is anything but normal. So we're looking for something that shows that the playwright's approach won't be normal. Okay, so let's just clear here. And now that we're looking for a second blank, that likely is probably confirm normal or go against normal. Let's look at the second blank first. This is something that the test makers try to get into your mind, that just because the first blank is first doesn't, it is an anchoring mechanism to try to get you to answer the first blank first. But we need to think a little bit more critically and think about what are the key words that the test maker is getting at. And here, the whole thing is, the key word here is normally. So we're going to take that and fill in the second blank and then approach the first one. So is there anything here in blank for blank number 2 that means the opposite is in that her works confirm or reject the normal? So here, distill. So let me here just highlight the word normal again. My pen. And distill means to get down to the essence of something. That doesn't mean confirm or reject. Wrong. Experiment with, to test what's normal. No. And the correct answer, it maybe is a word that you don't even know. And the correct answer here for number 2 is jettison, which means to throw off board or perhaps reject. So now let's read the sentence again. The playwright's approach is blank in that her work jettison the theatrical devices normally used to create on the stage. So that means that we're looking for a word here that goes with, let's think of a word without looking at the answer choices first. Maybe the playwright's approach is shocking. Now or strange or odd. Now let's look at the answer choices. I think that not even knowing what pedestrian and celebrated is a pretty common word to know if you studied for the SAT or any other test before. But startling is a pretty clear synonym to our previously predicted words of perhaps shocking or surprising, which really gets us directly to the answer choice, the correct answer choices. Jonathan, do you have anything else to add before we move forward?
No, that was fantastic. And again, what Daniella demonstrated was even in what's seemingly a fairly straightforward fill-in-the-blank vocabulary type question, first, we're going to predict and break down the syntax, the logic of the sentence. And as Daniella said, we don't necessarily have to know every vocabulary word under the sun, although certainly we can drill and use our flashcards to that end. All right. Fantastic. Introduction to quantitative reasoning. So recall back in the original structure, we're going to face 2 scored quant sections. That's the Q in our scaled out of 170 score. And those are generally going to be broken down into about 7 or 8 quantitative comparison, which we'll dive into just a bit today. About 10 or so quantitative problem solving questions, and about 3 or 4 charts and graphs in a data analysis section. So this is the rough breakdown of what those 20 questions on each of the 2 scored quantitative sections you'll see on test day. All right, quantitative comparison. These are super fun because they can be distilled and boiled down in pretty remarkable ways. So quantitative comparison questions are going to generally follow the same structure. Questions of this type will ask you to compare 2 quantities, quantity A and quantity B, and then determine which of the following statements describes the comparison. Choice A will always say quantity A is greater. Choice B will say quantity B is greater. Choice C will say the 2 quantities are equal. And choice D will say, I don't know. The relationship cannot be determined from the information given. So at the outset, for quantitative comparison questions, the answers are going to be our friends. And we're never going to read them again. A is bigger, B is bigger. They're equal, I don't know. All right, so let's take a look at an example of a quantitative comparison question from the GRE. So we start out often with a constraint or a condition. That's the line in bold. Let me pull out my pen. So this is our constraint. If my pen works for me. Our constraint, Deontay, is older than Mario. Okay, who's Deontay? Who's Mario? All right. Well, that's our constraint. And if we peer down, quantity A says half of Deontay's age, quantity B says half of Mario's age. Again, we can completely ignore the answer choices because they're always going to be the same. Now, there's a number of approaches and tools in our toolbox that we'll develop and hone, but let's walk through a couple. One of them that is often going to be helpful is to pick easy numbers. So let's pick easy numbers. Deontay is older than Mario. Okay, so what would satisfy that constraint, satisfy that condition? Well, let's say Deontay is 20 and Mario is 10. Okay, so let's take the easier quantity, Mario's age. Well, we just decided it's 10. And the other quantity, quantity A, is half of Deontay's age. All right, well, half of 20 is 10. Wait, hold on. 10 equals 10. I recall C says A equals B, so I circle C and I'm done, right? No. So there are many cognitive biases at play that the test maker is trying to prey on, including an anchoring bias around the ages that we'll select and the proximity of those ages to one another. But one of the other strategies that we'll implement when picking easy numbers, so let's just erase C, is, generally speaking, to test extremes and try to prove D, prove the I don't know. So recall, we picked the ages 20 and 10, right? We didn't have to. So let's pick different ages. Let's make a mark next to C because we already showed that they could be equal. Well, how else can we satisfy Deontay being older than Mario? What if Deontay is 70 and Mario is 65? All right, quantity B, Mario. Mario is still 65. Deontay is half of 70, so that's 35. All right, well, hold on. Now, quantity B is bigger than quantity A. So, do we just go with B? No. Do we even have to check A? Also no. Why? Because we're simultaneously picking easy numbers and testing extremes and trying to prove D. And what we've shown is that it's possible for the quantities to be equal and for B to be greater than A. So that is sufficient to unlock choice D, be done, and move on. Now, there are many approaches, even to this question alone. And so one example of that, as I'll just clear the screen, and a tool that we'll use in word problems in particular in the quant section, which includes translating to variables or to expressions. So one way we could do this is, while Deontay is older than Mario, okay, I kind of quickly glance, I don't really know anything other than that, so I can pick what we call variables, just a letter to stand in for any particular number. So say X and Y. So I know my constraint is that X is bigger than Y. And we're dealing with people and we're dealing with ages. So another implicit unstated constraint is that X and Y are greater than 0. Okay, we have X and Y. So let's go to the easier quantity, Mario's age. Mario is just Y. Half of Deontay, well, that's X over 2. Now, as we work together in training our quantitative analysis skills, we'll see already that we don't know anything about the relationship between X and Y, so we don't even have to pick the numbers, and we can go right to D. Again, we'll have many tools in our toolbox to tackle these questions, and some will work better depending on your preference. And now we're going to extend them to another question.
Excellent. Thank you, Jonathan. Now we're going to go over another question, which is a part of quantitative reasoning, which addresses a whole other part of the general language of the GRE, which is the idea of prime numbers. What is a prime number? If you don't remember, let's think back to our previous knowledge. And a prime number is a number that can only be divisible by itself and the number 1. This is a prime number. So one of the common themes of the GRE is asking about prime numbers. And because we know that, taking from building on what Jonathan was talking about before about proving D, in order to prove D, we need to have something that's ambiguous, something that's unclear about A and B, quantity A and quantity B. But in this case, if we look at the question, quantity A and quantity B are defined values. Quantity A is the least prime number greater than 24. So that's a defined value. We can find it and solve for it. And same with quantity B, the greatest prime number less than 28. So let's just look, we can list out the prime numbers and find these two concrete values. So let's do it together. We're going to make a little list here. So the first prime number is, what else do we know about prime numbers? Prime numbers there's only one prime number that is even, and that is 2. The rest of the prime numbers aren't going to be, even numbers aren't going to be prime because they're divisible by 2, which is a little trick. So the prime numbers, let's look at quantity A. The least prime number greater than 24 would be, okay, let's find, or the greatest prime number, let's look at the least prime number greater than 24. So what are our prime numbers? 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 23, and 29. Did I miss one here? 1, 3, 5, 7, 11,
19.
13, 19. Thank you, Jonathan. So what is the least prime number greater than 24? It's 29. And then let's look at quantity B, the greatest prime number less than 28. Less than 28, well, we already know that quantity A is 29 and quantity B is less than 28, so we don't even have to solve for quantity B. And we know that quantity A is greater. So here is a way that, like, by solving for one, sometimes we can solve for the other. We get into the test maker's mind in 2 ways here. First, by knowing that the common theme on the GRE is knowing what the prime numbers are and below 60. And second is knowing that we know that both quantity A and quantity B have defined concrete numbers, which already eliminates D. All right, so let me clear that out and I'll hand it back to you.
Fantastic. All right, so let's draw out some general conclusions about our approach to coaching and tutoring for the GRE to help unlock your grad school dreams. So as you've seen in a couple of examples today, we don't use a top-down approach. We use a bottom-up, skills-based foundational training to build tools in your toolbox to then apply to new scenarios and new contexts. Now, to extend this, we're not proponents and we don't teach how to hack bad tests, how to apply tips and tricks to hack, essentially, the test. We believe in teaching for a good or predictive test, which is what the GRE is structured and systematically assesses. So as an example, no other authoring will teach the bottom-up foundations of formal logic. So think about all that setup, all that framework that we did for our verbal reasoning, right? The if, gala, apple, then red. They just won't teach it. And they also won't teach consecutive integer patterns for the GRE. They also might, for quantitative comparison questions, again, in the top-down mindset, say, hey, test 0, 1, -1. Just do this. Here's some rule that we tell you to do. But the key is when, why, how do I know? So this is what bottom-up, skill-based drills look like as opposed to a top-down, rule-based memorization. And this really directly and literally comes from Daniella and the whole team's experience in struggling with these tests ourselves. We're not naturals by any stretch of the imagination, but we got top scores because we reverse engineered these systems for ourselves. So even formal logic alone, not having it, not drilling in it, can make a 99th percentile score on the verbal section nearly impossible. Now, this is tightly related to our approach and our values. We don't believe that you have to put your life on hold for the GRE or for the grad school admissions process generally. Rather, this is your and all of ours one precious life. And as you saw in just a few of the examples we walked through in verbal and quantitative reasoning, what we're guaranteeing is delivering that value, the impact, the increase in your score at the most efficient use of your resources and time. Because you should have a life outside of the GRE and the grad school admissions process. To that end, we do not use unpredictive, made-up questions. We exclusively use official test prep questions to deliver the most predictive and value for test day. Now, I mentioned up front the cognitive and behavioral science informed approach to our teaching. And I'll give you just an example in this very simple cognitive triad. Many of the students we've worked with, myself included, when I first approached the test, depending on what their background is or grad school aspirations are, might have thoughts like, I'm not a math person, I'm not a geometry person, or I'm not a data analysis person. So we might have certain lay beliefs, certain thoughts that will then determine our feelings, like anxiety, like fear, like shame. Those feelings will then in turn are test prep behaviors, including perfectionistic fantasies, avoidance, and the like. And notice how this triad is self-reinforcing. If we come and approach the test falsely thinking, this is a math test, I'm not a math person, so I'm anxious about the math section, even though we've debunked these fallacies already, notice how that will reinforce those behaviors to reinforce those thoughts. Just a simple example of how our thoughts can determine our behaviors and performance on the test. One other fun little ancillary benefit of working with a GRE Max coach and tutor is, and this again comes from our personal experience, it makes you a more informed consumer and logical thinker of information, particularly in all the information silos we live in today. So this is a skeptical dog does not accept your anecdotal evidence. Now, as we approach our time and again are thrilled and open to answer any questions and tailor them to your experience in particular, some of the next steps can include taking a free practice test online, taking an official GRE practice test, going on any of your devices and downloading the GRE Max app, and signing up for a free 20-minute consult with a member of the GRE Max team. And more than happy to actually stay on this call for those of you who want to invest in yourselves today. And to that end, in terms of the packages that we're thrilled to launch today, this is a basic outline. And for those of you who are really invested and again committed to getting that top score, getting into the grad program of your dreams. Now, just a couple of final thoughts. This is a student I worked with recently to give you a sense of the range and types of students who have come through our door. This student was preparing for the GRE for over 3 years while serving in the military, had taken the test 3 times, owned multiple sets of GRE prep books, had taken multiple courses. Their dream was to get into Harvard Business School, and they were aiming for the top percentiles. Had plateaued for years, so they turned to us for a fresh start. After 30 hours of tutoring together, their official GRE score increased by 5 points. And after another 15 hours of working together, their official GRE score increased by another 5 points. And this is actually the text I got from the student. They said, "Jonathan, I took the GRE today and got a 166 Q for quant, 165 B for verbal. Felt really good after our last session. This is a huge deal for me and the result of years of blood, sweat, and tears." And they're now doing a dual degree at Harvard Business School and Harvard Kennedy School in a master's in public policy and a master's in business administration. Just an example of someone who had worked for years, plateaued, and wanted a new, fresh start. These are some 5-star reviews of the GREMax app. Now, these are some more niche, kind of nuanced questions, and we're happy to tailor them to your specific questions, but I'll just briefly outline, and this comes from our experience applying to a wide range of programs, why you might consider the GRE if you have already taken or are thinking about taking the GMAT or the LSAT. First, there's no one size fits all. It's whatever test is the best fit to you and your needs. But I will say, part of why I love the GRE is you can take it at home 24/7, 365, and you can take one test only. So if you want to apply to a JD, an MBA, literally almost any master's program, literally almost any PhD program in the world, you can take one test and prepare for one test alone. So if you're looking for flexibility, for optionality, if you're thinking about joint degrees, you can just take the GRE. The GRE also tends to be more transparent and tech forward. You can literally take it on your laptop. You get your scores immediately, as we talked about. You have score choice, so you're not locked into a particular score. And critically, it is treated equally. And the data shows it is equally predictive of the outcomes that both the GMAT and the LSAT were intended to predict. And as we recall, ETS, which runs and creates the GRE, actually created the GMAT itself. So there's a lot of similarities in these tests, but why take more than one if you can just take one and apply almost literally anywhere? So this may apply to some of you. Some recent developments that I find really exciting, in part because some data shows the GRE increases accessibility, diversity, students from science, technology, engineering, and math backgrounds who can now apply to most every law school, most every top law school. Nearly 100% of business schools already accept the GRE now for a while. Every top program and increasingly early MBA programs. And generally speaking, as you all may have seen in your grad school admissions process, grad schools are really locking in talent, early, if they can. There tends to be fewer application fees. The GRE is broadly and widely accepted. And many programs are offering significant scholarships for students with higher GRE scores. Just as an example, so I mentioned up front that I did my MBA, I went to business school at NYU Stern. And as an example, at NYU Stern, they will have scholarships up to $250,000. And having a much higher GRE score is a significant advantage in these scholarship application processes. For those who are, again, thinking about other types of programs as well, there are easily available score conversion tools on the ETS website. So for instance, I translate my 170 verbal and 165 quant into a 174 LSAT, and likewise to a 760 on the GMAT. So you can see what grad school admissions would be looking at if you are considering applying to these programs as well. With that, we're so thrilled and so thankful, excited to launch our GREMax tutoring. We're here to answer any questions you have. And again, for those of you who are committed and want to invest in yourself and your grad school dreams today, we're more than happy to stick on to do a consult. I'm going to pull up the chat and Q&A. And for folks who are on, feel free to introduce yourselves, share what you want from the GRE, what you want from the grad school admissions process. Any other questions, thoughts, reflections, how we can be of help, be a resource to you. And I see some folks might just be joining. We just concluded the substantive portion of our introduction to GRE Max, but we're here to answer any and all questions and be of support and be a resource to you about the GRE Max, grad school admissions more generally. Daniella, do you have any questions?
Do I have any questions?
Thoughts, reflections?
I'm really curious, like if I were to start my test prep today, how would you recommend after looking at the packages, would I get started?
Yeah, super great question. Frankly, I would suggest, depending on what your grad school dreams were, investing and committing in a 30-hour package. I've just found that with students I've worked with, that gives us enough time to substantively work through their target areas and give a significant score bump. But you can get whatever you think works best for you. But I've just found that folks who are in the mindset of, I'm going to invest and commit to reaching my target score, that works best, just in my experience.
Thank you. Good to know.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. It's been an honor. We're thrilled to have had you. And don't hesitate to reach out with any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much.